Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Buzz Amato. Buzz Amato is an independent producer, writer, arranger, and keyboardist with over 40 years in the music industry. He appears on more than 150 CDs as a performer or producer. During the 80s, Buzz toured the world with the legendary Curtis Mayfield as music director, and during that time also became a staff producer for Ichiban Records. In the 90s, Buzz focused on production and arranging, working with some of music's finest such as Gerald Albright, Kirk Whalum, and Ben E. King, to name a few. He continues to tour a few times a year as musical director for R&B legends The 3 Degrees, who he also produces. In 2000, Buzz created Amatones Music, which focuses on independent production and film scoring. He has composed music for CNN, Delta Airlines, the Discovery Channel, and the Weather Channel. His orchestration skills provided him the opportunity to score 2 pieces for pianist Bob Thompson and the West VA Symphony Orchestra. September of 2005, Buzz released his debut CD, A Collection, on Blue Canoe Records. Music from that release can be found both in film and TV. In addition to producing and the occasional tour, Buzz splits his time between teaching and independent film scores. His score for the 80s-esque horror film Babysitter Massacre helped propel that film to cult-like status. Currently, he's working on a new CD, Muse Cafe, to be released in 2021, as well as writing a book of his travels as a musician and life as a producer entitled Repeat Offender. Buzz, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Jared. Good to be here.
Great to have you. We've got 40 years of rich material here to dive into and learn from. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun.
So why don't we dive right in? Why don't you tell me in your mind, what is innovation?
You know, we've talked about this several times, and probably each time we've talked about it, I've given you a different answer. And today will be no different.
I love it.
I think innovation is creativity, inspiration, technology, kind of all coming together to enhance your art and to take the past into the future.
I like that. Take the past into the future. Tell me more about that. So what does that mean?
I don't know. No, we create art very similar than we have since the beginning of time.
Sure.
However, when you combine it with an individual's artistry and their creativity, and even the technology, we kind of propel it a little further and hopefully stretch the boundaries of what is and is acceptable, what isn't, and what introducing new sounds and concepts to people.
Right. So the reaching back, bringing the past into the future, incorporating technology into that definition makes a lot of sense because, I can look back over the history of music, with your help and your education, and look at places where people took musical concepts that existed previously, but applied them to a new instrument or a new technology applied to that instrumentation, and created something new and innovative.
Yes. Just several centuries ago, having certain intervals in your music was considered, no, we can't do that. And because music at that point was governed so much by church,
right?
They had their, there's an interval called the tritone, which you're familiar with. It used to be called the devil's interval. So that was not allowed.
Ironically, it's between a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth, right?
Exactly.
So there's the perfect fourth, the devil's interval, and then the perfect fifth.
Yes. If somebody walked over to their piano and played a C and an F sharp, that would be a tritone.
And that was forbidden by the church.
Yes.
Amazing.
So, but then you had people like Bach who used to sneak it in, and it would be so well disguised because he wouldn't land on it. He would move forward from there.
Ah.
And then it just, that interval, along with, so many other things, just kind of became more acceptable.
Right, right. You mentioned Bach, who's, loosely connected to the piano in most
He
people's
was,
minds.
he was all right.
Exactly. So he kind of, had a style on the piano. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Debussy, they all had their own sort of styles on the piano, to the point that you hear their music and you say, "Oh, okay, that's this person."
Exactly. It's their signature.
Right, right. Um, how does that evolve or change, that signature over the years, or through instruments and things like that?
Well, you go back to Mozart and Bach's time, the piano is not even as we know it now.
Right,
So when the piano came into existence, the actual name is pianoforte, which is Italian for soft to loud.
right.
So that was a huge innovation there, and that affected how people were able to write music.
Hmm.
And you take that right up to the modern day piano, synthesizers, it all changes how you perceive and perform music.
Right. Back then, it was more the old school piano, whatever that looked like the progenitor to the modern piano, and the harpsichord
And organ.
and organ. And so those things, when you're playing Bach on a piano, on today's piano, part of that sound is the fact that he would he created it on these older instruments.
Right. And it's basically a type of reinterpretation, because even if you look at some of the scores, they vary in different places because of that.
Right, right. So bringing it into today's instruments is a form of innovation.
Absolutely. When Bob Moog created the first Moog synthesizers, one of the biggest albums that came out was Wendy Carlos, who at that time was Walter Carlos, doing Switched on Bach.
Hmm.
You can hear most of that score in the movie A Clockwork Orange.
Oh, wow.
But it was playing all these Bach fugues and cantatas and things on the synthesizer. It was just, mind bending.
Yeah, yeah. It does create a mood. When you think about that movie, you almost hear some of those riffs, some of those pieces,
Exactly.
yeah, in your mind, as you're thinking about the scenes. It's very evocative.
Yes.
But you don't think, when you hear it, you don't think, "Oh, that's Bach."
Well, yeah,
You
I
do.
do, but
You do.
but yeah, the average person probably isn't thinking that's Bach. Some of the pieces they might recognize,
Hmm.
but it was the sound
Right.
that was the real innovation in everything, because
Exactly.
no one had done that.
Exactly.
So that's a perfect example of taking something from the past and moving it forward into the future.
Centuries, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that movement isn't even, is centuries. It's not centuries. Sometimes it's decades or years. Like, one of my favorite stories you tell is about Les Paul.
Right. He was considered the father of multi-track recording, and he and his wife, Mary Ford, would do these great records. And one of the things that Les Paul did was, because he could record one sound on top of another, he would play his guitar and then he would play the same thing an octave higher, because it gave it a big full sound. And that became his sound. Well, along comes Wes Montgomery. Now, Wes Montgomery didn't know anything about multi-tracking.
Right.
He just would listen to Les Paul and go, man, this guy is incredible. And so he's sitting at home shedding and doing all this stuff. And the next thing you know, Les Paul ends up coming to one of Wes's gigs, and because he wants to meet him. And he's like, you are probably one of the most amazing guitar players I've ever met. And Wes is just, I learned it all from you. And he goes, well, no, I'm talking about playing the octaves and all that. And he goes, yeah, I got that from your records. And, Wes was like, I do multi-track recording. I'm playing that same part twice. And here you have a guy that, perceived that sound to be very innovative.
Right.
And he perceived it to be natural. So he was just emulating. But what he didn't know is he was emulating the work of two guitarists, essentially.
Wow. So there was an element of ignorance in that innovation that gave him the space to
I
find
kind of,
a.
yeah, I kind of like to look at it as more naivete,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's that same concept.
Mm-hmm.
And he also developed this style where he played with his thumb because he didn't want to wake the kids after he came home from a gig, and he liked to practice.
Mm,
So he would take his guitar out and he'd play with his thumb so it would soften the sound.
right.
And that became his signature. So
Ah.
between the octaves and the thumb, as soon as you hear it, you know it's Wes Montgomery,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have people like George Benson and Lee Ritenour have all carried on that tradition.
Right. Yeah, and I think the thing that music makes so obvious that's a bit more obscure in other fields from an innovation standpoint is that it isn't it's never finished.
Right,
Les Paul did something, right, and Les had his thing, and Wes Montgomery heard that and took it a step further. I mean, you can look at
right.
Miles Davis, John Coltrane.
Well, there's a great little Miles Davis statement that was in his book where he was asked, how did you do all that? Who did you listen to? And he's like, I didn't listen to anybody. I was too busy making this stuff up.
Mhm.
You can emulate anyone. And most of us coming up, that's what we do. We learn how to play a Herbie Hancock solo, or we learn how Stevie Wonder voices chords and things like that. And
Mhm.
we take all that and hopefully you develop your own voice.
Right, right. And that voice is what people connect to.
Yes.
It's not necessarily the instrument you're playing or the technology you're using. It's how all of that serves.
Right. And the instrument itself, it's like you can listen to someone like Herbie Hancock play a Fender Rhodes.
Mhm.
You can tell it's Herbie Hancock because of the sound of his instrument, his touch, his feel. Again, we go back to signature.
Right, right. And and there's products and services like that too. Apple, when Apple makes something, you don't have to turn it over to see if there's an apple on the back.
Exactly.
They have a signature style that is iconic.
The only difference in art and in business is we don't have an innovation department.
Right. Exactly. Like I'm kind of stuck on this bridge.
Right.
Let me hand that over to the innovation department.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a theme that comes up a lot with other guests is, the conversation about, what is innovation and how can innovation be a job title?
Right.
It doesn't make any logical sense.
Well, in the business sense, it does. In the music industry, the business is in dire need of some innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Dire.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
Oh, where do I start? Radio used to sell records.
Right.
We have no real radio anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You can set your channel to listen to only things that you're going to like or that are similar to what you like.
Right. And when you say real radio, you're talking about 60s,
Even 70s
70s,
and even into the early 80s.
where you could run into music that you hadn't heard before.
Right.
There was the variety and diversity of music.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you've heard me say a million times when I was growing up a long time ago, let's just say, when I really first started getting serious about music in the 60s, I could cut the radio on and 1 minute I would hear Motown. The next minute I would hear the Beatles. And 2 minutes later, I'm hearing Barbra Streisand or Burt Bacharach.
Wow. All on the same station.
All on the same station.
Yeah,
So
that's crazy.
you're getting all these influences coming at you. And now probably in the mid 70s with FM radio, things became very compartmentalized. So, and it's continued that way, even what radio exists now. This is your station for rock. This is your station for urban contemporary.
Right.
You don't get that. You don't get exposed the same way you do.
What do you think that's done for kind of, we can call it innovation, but for, the evolution of music?
I think it's hurt in a lot of ways because you're not drawing from as many influences as someone who kind of came up in that era. So as a composer, I can create a 60s Jobim, bossa kind of piece of music, or I can turn around and do something that's, kind of headbanging.
Right. Because you've got that, you got that exposure early on, and you are aware of those styles.
Now you have to seek that out. And it gets tougher because there's so much stuff out there, and this is getting back to the business. There's no one curating it.
Right.
It's great that you can do your record at home now. You can release it on your own. You can do your own videos, but not all of it's good.
Right. And how do you differentiate? How do you wade through all the stuff that's there to find what's good and what's?
I don't know if you can. I'll sit down and go through YouTube, and I'll find an artist that, I hadn't heard this person before. I kind of like this, and I'll go listen to some more of their music. And then, either Spotify or something may make suggestions.
Right.
And I'll check those out. And most of the time I'm disappointed. I just feel like, I just discovered somebody. and music is so disposable now. And that's a big part of it, because we don't value art the same way we used to. You probably remember as well, buying an album, coming home, sitting down with that album in your hand, listening to every track, reading the liner notes, who's playing. There's records today, I cannot tell you who's even on the record.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I remember being so excited to buy I got a CD player for Christmas, which meant I could get my first CD. And I remember it was In Vogue, Funky Divas.
Yeah.
And I listened to that CD. Yeah, I read every single inch of the cover liner and everything else, and then got my next CD, probably Boyz II Men or somebody like that, and did the same thing. And I could probably, at the time, probably could have told you who played drums and who played
exactly
horns on those albums. But you're right. I don't even know who the backup singers are on some things that are happening today, let alone instrumentalists.
Right, because we don't have anything in our hands anymore. Same thing with literature.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great that you can read something on a tablet, but my God, where's the connection, the physical connection to this stuff?
Yeah. And I love that your unique definition of innovation has that aspect of bringing part of the past into the present. So moving something from one technology to the next is not necessarily innovative if you start to lose some of the things that made it unique and special in the previous kind of iteration.
Right. But tell that to someone under 30, 35 years old.
Right.
And, they just kind of look at you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There was this big, I don't like the phrase, but hipster kind of movement where everybody started buying record players again and buying albums and all those things. And I feel like, that's an important thing, but it's always going to be fringe. It's always going to be, avant-garde to a certain extent. I think even the way you engage, and I'm new to albums and records myself just in the last 10, 15 years, but I think it's not just about the warmth of the sound and all those other things, but it's also about that album cover. I mean, John Coltrane,
Artwork.
yeah, John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme" sounds different when you're looking at that artwork.
Right. And when you know how that record was
Yeah,
created.
you read that liner. I mean, the liner notes on "A Love Supreme," amazing.
Yeah, and the technology used there was, we're going to cut it straight to 2-track. Like now we have Pro Tools,
Sure.
and and don't get me wrong, all that stuff is great. I use it all the time. It makes things a lot easier.
Right.
But in some cases, it gives you too many choices where
Hmm.
you don't want to commit.
Right. Right. That's so true. And I think in every industry or kind of mode or method of innovation, there is that aspect of understanding what it is you're leaving behind as you move forward, and making sure that you're making intentional choices and asking yourself, how can I bring some of this past into the present? In terms of thinking about things like, okay, the album cover, the tape insert, the CD insert that's going away. How can we bring that to life? And you see some players, some streamers are now trying to do more with bringing lyrics into things and things like that. Probably do a bit more with artist recognition, like full artist recognition.
Yeah, you'll see a little bit of like digital booklets.
Yeah, things like that. So hopefully, as people think about those sorts of things, when you think about developing a product or developing a service, asking yourself that question, in moving 10 steps forward in this area of this product or this service, where might I be taking a step or two back?
Right.
Hmm.
We have made music much more accessible to people.
Yes.
Way more.
Yes.
However, getting back to the business side, this does nothing for an artist.
Right.
In 1976, the copyright law, Title 17, I believe it was,
Mm.
they proclaimed a statutory rate for radio play. We don't have that right now in streaming. So you're really at the mercy of whatever Spotify or Pandora decides to pay you.
So Title 17 specifically called out the current medium at the time.
Right. It was a long overdue overhaul to the copyright laws.
Right.
I think that's when they decided you could hold a copyright for 70 plus years or something like that. And they said, okay, if you're going to get played on radio, this is how much you're going to make.
Wow.
So you knew where your revenue streams were.
Right. So I wonder why that hasn't been updated for modern technologies. Like, I mean, it seems like you could set a statutory rate for streams.
You could very easily do that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but I think there's a bill that comes around every year called the Fair Music Act.
Okay.
And it gets shut down because, Congress is like, they're musicians, whatever.
Right.
And that gets back to valuing art as well.
It also should take on a different level of importance and a different meaning in this current environment. And as we're recording this in February 2021, music venues are shut.
Yes.
And so if you think about sources of revenue for artists,
it's very slim.
It's very slim.
Film and TV still remain your two best sources.
Right. So that Fair Music Act, I think, takes on a different level of importance for the creative talent behind it to be able to benefit from those streams in a more equitable way.
Yeah, I read once where Pharrell got something like 14 or 15 million streams of Happy on Spotify and only made like $1,100. Either $1,100 or $1,400. It was either way, it's just insane.
Yeah, it's that's insane. If Pharrell can't make money on Happy, make more money than that on Happy, what chance does a musician who used to make, the bulk of their music money touring or playing live gigs, streaming
Right.
becomes a different means a different thing to them now.
And that is one of the few ways that artists can actually make money, or could before the pandemic hit,
Right.
was merchandise
Right.
during a tour.
Yeah.
Because typically you're going to lose your shirt on a tour,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're a big established act. If you're Paul McCartney going out there, yeah, you're going to make your
You'll do all right.
million five a week, a night. So
Yeah.
that's a different scenario. But I went and saw a group a few years ago called Pamplemousse. They're very big on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a husband and wife duo, and the husband created Patreon.
Okay.
They stream from there.
Yeah.
Well, they did a whole thing on how they went on tour, and they felt it was a success because they only lost about $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah, but they considered it a win.
Music is a tough business. It's a tough business.
It is, even at its best.
Yeah. I mean, not trying to pick on the streaming aspect of it, or because all of it is tough to kind of get to the point where you can make a solid living at it.
Well, the record labels made a huge mistake when Napster first came out, and all of a sudden, it was free music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the record labels fought it tooth and nail. As always, they tried to control things. If they would have embraced it and come up with a new model, and Apple kind of did that for a while when they had, iTunes.
Right.
You would get paid. It still wouldn't be great, but it was better than 0.0000003% per play.
Right.
But that's when the record labels really had their chance to come up with something innovative, to go, okay, there's this free music here, but what if we did this and still gave you the access to all this music?
Right.
And that's why you see all these subscription services.
Right.
And that's all well and fine for the listener, but it does absolutely nothing for the artist.
Right. There was probably a window in there where Warner Brothers or Sony or CBS could have done what CBS and Paramount and NBC, Universal, all these companies are doing now with their video content. They're pulling it onto their own platforms. There was probably a window back then where Warner could have said, well, you know what, we're going to pull all our music on a digital platform.
Yeah, just shift their catalog.
Yeah.
But yeah, that it was brand new. The digital age, internet age just stormed in.
It did.
And it was coming from so many different sides, and people were getting real creative on how to use it.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it's reflective of our natural tendency to just kind of hunker down and protect what we have. And that's why I love talking to innovative thinkers, because it kind of flies in the face of our natural tendency as humans. When change, the new things come at you, we probably more often than not operate like the music industry and try to protect what we've got, what's gotten us here and what creates value for us, versus trying to explore and embrace what's new.
Well, and that's also why you're seeing artists get into other areas of music. You're seeing more and more, just like actors, you're seeing big actors do series on Netflix and things like that. Musicians are doing the same thing in terms of composing. Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails is a growing composer.
Right.
Danny Elfman, who came from the group Oingo Boingo.
I did not know that. I didn't know him as a great...
As Danny Elfman,
yeah.
He started out as, I guess kind of a new age artist or new age pop. Yeah. So these are other ways that they're finding, to maintain a revenue.
Right. Yeah. So Buzz, I can't let you go without asking you about touring with Curtis Mayfield, one of my favorite artists. He's such a unique personality and such a unique person in so many ways. Musically, I'm speaking just as a fan. I'm sure you know what you speak, but what kind of innovation, lessons or examples did you take from working with Curtis for so long?
Curtis had a mantra: simplicity is the rule.
Oh, I love that.
It's not necessarily innovative, but one of the first times I went and rehearsed with him, we were doing something, and he was just like, I like what you're doing there, Cat, but it's too much. Uh, and that was the first time I heard him say, "Simplicity is the rule," and it took some getting used to.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I've got not all these chops, but I've got these
Hey,
chops.
you can play.
But no, don't use those. But that in itself taught me how to play within a more constrained format and still maintain my voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine that that brings a lot of clarity to what you're trying to say as well, in a lot of in a lot of situations.
Yeah, you tend to start looking at, well, what am I doing? We've all heard the Herbie Hancock story about Miles telling him not to play the butter notes. But what he was telling him was not to play the bottom notes. But Herbie didn't know that. So
Right.
Herbie went back and he was like, no, don't play the butter notes. He just figured that meant don't play these particular tones in a chord. And he created a whole new style of playing because that's the route he went.
Yeah, only two geniuses could have a miscommunication
And turn it into
and turn it into like a revolutionary new
exactly.
way of creating music. I mean, I love music, and I think a lot of the reason I was drawn to innovation in particular in the business world is because it's the most musical aspect of the business world. In terms of having a rhythm to it, allowing for improvisation, being focused more on the people you're working with and what you're creating for the consumer, the end user.
Yes, and collaboration,
Collaboration.
when you said the people you're creating with, especially in a live circumstance,
Hmm.
because you can never recreate that.
Right.
It's all in the moment, especially if you're doing improvisational music. Uh, it's there in just a split second and then it's gone.
Right.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. But it always moves forward.
It has to move forward.
That's right. That chord is gone. You cannot go back
Right.
and fix it.
But if you play a wrong note twice, you meant to do it.
That may be a rule unique to jazz players, but I think, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I like it though. I like it. Buzz, any advice for innovators out there, musical or otherwise?
I would say keep learning. Education is very important.
Hmm.
Learn from the people who came before you and absorb as much as you can. A great guitarist, Pat Martino, told me one time, learn everything you can about music and forget it.
Mm.
Because at that point, you've internalized it all.
Hmm.
And now you're able to speak freely and possibly take your playing and your thought process in playing to an entirely different level.
Right.
So I think that's very important.
Hmm.
Just emulating someone is not going to get you to innovation.
Hmm.
I can go on YouTube right now and I can see like 8-year-old kids playing, Billy Cobham drum solos and just go, whoa. But it's great that they can do that, but it's not interesting
Hmm.
because it's not their voice. Now, show me that kid 15 years from now, and he's probably killing it.
Right. 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 Yeah. No, I think that those are two great points. The continuing the education and the kind of push past the point of parroting.
Explore.
Yeah, to explore and find your own voice using what came before as a jumping off point.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. No. Well, thank you, Buzz. Thank you for furthering my musical education, and I appreciate your friendship and all the great stories, man. We'll have to come back for you to we'll just spend a half hour you telling stories.
I'd love to.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.